Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. So today we're gonna be chatting about how to find somewhere to live in Sydney. So since moving to Sydney 3 years ago, I have lived in 5 different places. There's all these little tips that I wish I had known when I was first, looking for apartments and places to live in Sydney. So I'm gonna share those with you today. Most of you guys, if you are moving from overseas, will not be purchasing a place in Sydney just because of the tax laws here for foreigners. So this is really all about renting. Okay, so the first thing you need to think about when you are moving to Sydney and looking for somewhere to live is, where do you work? So a lot of people who move here don't realize how big and spread out Sydney is. If you're in the CBD, so the Central Business District, if you are working there, obviously most trains and public transport will go into the CBD, but there's just the difference between, sitting on the train for 10 minutes versus like an hour. So that's kind of the tricky thing, is that places that are still considered Sydney can be like an hour away from each other. So you really have to figure out like exactly where you live and check out Google Maps and kind of look at like surrounding suburbs because there are also like big tech parks like North Ryde and stuff like that that are not near the city that can be more difficult to get to, especially if you don't live around that area. So there's 3 main websites for you guys to check out: realestate.com.au, domain.com.au, and flatmatefinders.com.au. I'll obviously put all these links down below. So domain and realestate.com.au are the 2 main ones that you will find, both renting and buying. And then Flatmate Finders is where you will find obviously share houses. You can either create a profile as somebody that has a house and you are looking for flatmates, or you can go on if you are looking for a room or a share house yourself for somebody that already has one. And I know that, it can be scary, especially moving to another country, but Flatmate Finders is really, really safe, obviously within reason. But it is a really good website. Like, a ton of people I know have found their flatmates through it. Like, it's not sketchy. So you can create a profile with like your work information, like the type of lifestyle you like to lead, things like that, so you can find the perfect match. There's also Facebook groups. So there's like Bondi Loop. There's another one for the Inner West called, let me find it. I think it's called like Inner West Housing or something. Yeah, Sydney Inner West Housemates, Inner West Pet Friendly Housemates. So there's lots of Facebook groups. So once you guys have figured out the area that you want to live in, then maybe type that into Facebook. Another thing to think about when you guys are looking for a place to live is what the area is called, not just the suburb. And that's just because that will help you figure out like things like Facebook groups and stuff, because it will be called like Inner West Facebook group, but Inner West is not a suburb, or like Eastern Suburbs, housemates group, but the Eastern Suburbs is not a suburb, it's an area. So when you, figure out where you're gonna move or figure out where you're going to be working, find some suburbs around. And honestly, if you just Google like Newtown, New South Wales, I'm sure that like it will come up on Google, and Wikipedia it will say it is part of the Inner West Council or whatever. Just like that's a really minor thing to think about. So let's get into really important things to know when you are going through the leasing process. So the first thing to know is that in Sydney, at least in my experience, it's never been the landlord who looks after the leasing. They hire a leasing agent. It's very, very common practice that you will actually like never meet the landlord or know who the landlord is. That can be good and bad. Obviously, in a lot of ways, it's really good because they know all the laws, and if they're with a really big one like Rain and Horn, Bell Property, they'll usually like abide by the books. Sometimes, usually. If you have a problem, they will be at your door right away fixing it, things like that. Obviously the downside is that they don't own the property. They're not as emotionally invested in it as somebody that is, the actual owner. And obviously leasing agents, they just want to get as much money as possible. So you do have to really cover your bases and make sure that when you guys are moving in, that you are doing a really thorough check of the apartment, like not just signing off on the inspection when you first like get it sent through to you, like actually go through everything that they've said is wrong with the apartment, cross-check it and make sure you're adding things to it, because I've had multiple situations where the leasing agent at the end of a lease is like, oh, you guys did this and that, and they just literally, it is so common, they will just try and take your bond. Like almost every single person I know in Sydney who has rented here has had a horror story of at least one of their leasing agents trying to take part of their bond, which is just for coming from Canada, that's just not that common. Like you usually just always get it back unless there's obviously a major thing that's been wrong with the apartment. So they will really try and like ding you for like general wear and tear. So just make sure you're recording everything. Just give them nothing to work off of. So on the note of bond, so bond is basically like the security deposit, that's what we would call it in Canada. So when you sign a lease, you have to pay 2 weeks rent, and then you usually have to pay 4 weeks bond. So that is, you know, what they will take from if there's any damage. It's kind of like a deposit, I guess. The next thing to know about the rental process in Sydney is that it is very rare that you will actually get like a one-on-one inspection of the property. So I know like in Canada, every time I've rented, and I've rented, you know, in a bunch of different cities for years, they always like, you can call the agent or email or whatever, either the landlord or the agent, and they will just take you through, like they will book like a one-on-one appointment with you. But here, because the market is so fast, they just do it a little bit differently here. It's kind of like they hold open houses for rental properties as well. So when you are on Domain or realestate.com.au, make sure you guys are like checking the inspection time. So it will say like next inspection will be on Saturday, and it's usually 15 minutes. So you really got to get there. It's usually from like literally like 12 to 12:15 or something. And they will just go from property to property, like back to back. Make sure you block off like, you know, all of Saturday morning. They usually don't have them on Sundays. It's usually just Saturdays, and then they'll have some midweek, like it'll be like Wednesday at 5 p.m. or something like that. Just go into that knowing that you will be there with like a million other people that are looking for that, like looking at that place. And it's really, really helpful to have your application already done. Even if you end up getting there and you don't like the place. Most rental applications are not like in person anymore. They're all online. So sometimes they are online through the agent, like depending if the agency that the landlord is using is really small and boutique, sometimes they'll just have their own online application form. But most of them that I've experienced use either OneForm or TApp. And the best thing about OneForm and TApp is that once you've done one application, you've uploaded all of your stuff, you can use your one profile for multiple different properties. So if you get your profiles done on those 2 websites before you go and start looking and doing inspections, then you know you can literally like apply from your phone while you're there. Because if it is a high market, especially if you're looking in the eastern suburbs, which is like Bondi and stuff, like if it's a really fast market and like high demand, which it always is in that area, it is often first come, first serve. So if you apply first and you can prove all your finances, you know, that you're on a valid visa, all of that kind of stuff, you have really good references, then like you'll get it over somebody that applied, you know, an hour later. Every time that I've looked for places, we would always have our applications filled out depending on the ones we liked. So like obviously we'd go through Domain, let's say, and figure out, okay, we want to see all these properties. They all use TApp, or like this one used OneForm, this one uses TApp. So we would create the profiles and then we would apply. And you mandatory, like it's absolute mandatory, you have to inspect a property before you get accepted to lease it. So you do have to attend the inspection, but most of the time you can apply in advance, or if you can't, you can literally apply like as soon as it hits 12:15 and the inspection's over. So the things that these applications will be asking for, obviously like your rental history, references of previous landlords. They'll be looking for proof of employment, which is really difficult if you guys are moving here and you don't already have a job, which is why a lot of people that move here, they will do like flatmates or something where it's like subletting someone's house instead of actually like getting their own rental property. They'll also be looking for proof of 3 months income. We've had a couple instances where they've actually asked for proof of our savings account. It's really intense. Like it's really like personal, like it feels like an invasion of privacy because they're literally asking you to just like shell out like all of your bank details, like show all your accounts, all that kind of stuff. But that's just the nature of the market here. Not every agency will do that, but I have applied for a few properties where they've made us do that. And of course, like government issued IDs, and they don't need to be Australian as long as you have a valid visa, which you can attach as well. So a standard lease here, I've only encountered 12-month leases, but I know that like some do offer 6 months. So it's between like 6 to 12 months, and most rent is paid fortnightly unless you ask. Like if you're paid monthly, let's say, then then they might allow you to pay rent monthly. But for the most part, it's usually just every 2 weeks. And then once your lease ends, obviously depending on the situation, you can usually stay in that property and be on a month-to-month rolling lease as long as you give 1 month notice before you do want to move out after that year or whenever your lease is up. And when you are looking online at properties, the prices that you guys see will be weekly. So if it says, you know, $750 for this property, that does not mean 750 Australian dollars per month. That means per week to rent the place. I work in the CBD, and the areas that I've always lived in and that I would look and that I would personally consider living in are the Inner West. So that's like Newtown, Marrickville, like Petersham, Lewisham, like Redfern even. Redfern used to be a little bit sketchy and it's kind of coming up, but just definitely like take a walk around the area if you guys do look at an apartment in Redfern, just to make sure it's like, you know, an okay area, because some areas of Redfern are better than others. Surrey Hills, that's not really Inner West, that's more kind of like central. I would also look in the eastern suburbs. So I used to live in Double Bay at one point, so like Double Bay, you know, Bondi Junction, Willara, that kind of area, Paddington, Pudgee and stuff. But the only issue is that it is more difficult usually to get to the city from those areas, although people that live there don't like to admit that. But like you usually have to take the bus. You can't, there's like no trains unless you live right at Junction. And the traffic is like insane. So like on the buses in the morning and stuff. So yeah, it's just like a little bit more out of the way because there's no train line. And then Lower North Shore, so that's where we live now. Again, there's no train line around where we live. So I do have to take the bus, and it takes me a lot longer than it did when I lived in Newtown to get into the city, even though driving, like, the distances are probably the same if there was no traffic, but because there's no train line, it just takes, you know, quite a bit longer. Yeah, those are kind of like the main areas I would say are safe and have a lot of young people, have like honestly not so much the Lower North Shore where we live now. It is more suburban and like quieter, more like young families or like retired people. But if you live close to Military Road, then it's okay. But yeah, like Inner West and eastern suburbs are young people, always lots going on, lots of good restaurants and bars and stuff like that. And lastly, guys, don't get discouraged if like application after application you are getting denied. As with most major cities in the world, like it's a very competitive market. Sometimes people will actually like bid and offer to pay more per month or more per week or whatever for their rent just to get that property. So that sometimes happens in Sydney, and I had never heard of that happening, you know, before in renting. I'm sure it does. I just had never encountered it. So that was a surprise to me. So that's just a little something to know, is that like you won't get accepted right away usually, unless the market's down or it's like a bizarre time to be moving. When Sean and I moved into this place, we did get accepted like right away, just because it was a weird time to move, and the rental market in Sydney at the moment is really shit apparently. So if you guys are moving here soon, that's really good for you. Anyways, guys, that's it for this video. I hope that it was a little bit helpful for you guys. I obviously didn't want to go into too much detail about like where I think people should live, like because Sydney is so big, it completely depends on what you're looking for, you know, where you're going to be working, stuff like that. So if you have any more questions, like more detailed questions about like specific suburbs, like first of all, please Google it. I don't know everything about Sydney. I got a lot of DMs and some people are asking me like very specific questions, and I'm like, you could just probably Google that. But if you want some like advice or something like that, feel free to send me a message on Instagram, and I will hopefully be able to get back to you. All right, guys, thanks so much for watching this video. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and I will talk to you guys later. Bye.